For years, I saw the bruises my mother tried to hide. I heard the slammed doors and the shouting that rattled our perfect suburban home. But I was a cop. In my world, suspicion gets you nowhere. You need evidence. You need proof. Then one day, I found it. Not in the case file, not from an informant, but tucked inside a dusty photo album. A single picture that proved my dad wasn't just a man with a temper. He was a monster. And his double life was financed by my mother's fear. I was his daughter, yes, but I also wore a badge. And I was about to use his own rules of power and control to burn his entire world to the ground.
There's a strange duality to being a cop and the child of a secret. On the job, the lines were sharp. Victims and perpetrators, good and bad. My days were spent sifting through the wreckage of other people's lives, finding patterns in the chaos. My commander called me his bulldog. I'd sink my teeth into a case and not let go until justice was served. I was good at it. I could spot a lie from across a steel table. But when I went home, that clarity vanished. The lines blurred and disappeared into a thick fog of family loyalty. Our house was a monument to my father's success, a sprawling home on a tree-lined street. To the outside world, we were the picture of stability. My father, Richard Miller, was a pillar of the community, a self-made construction mogul. He was charming, charismatic, and publicly generous. He sponsored Little League teams, made grand donations at charity auctions. Everyone knew Richard Miller. Everyone liked him. But I knew the man who lived behind that front door. I knew the silence that crashed down the moment his car crunched in the driveway. I knew the way my mother, Eleanor, would flinch if he raised his voice, even if he was laughing. Her life was a carefully curated performance. Her home was immaculate, her smile always ready. But I saw the cracks, the long-sleeved blouses in summer, the sunglasses worn indoors. The excuses were always ready. She was clumsy. She'd walked into a door. She'd tripped. And her most frequent, soul-crushing line, "Don't you worry about me, honey. It's nothing." But it was something. It was a cancer eating away at her, leaving a hollowed-out version of the woman I remembered. The worst part was the powerlessness. I put men like him behind bars for a living, but I couldn't protect my own mother. She refused to file a report, refused to leave. He had woven a web of emotional and financial dependency around her so skillfully she couldn't see a way out. He had convinced her she was nothing without him, that no one would believe her. It was a textbook case of coercive control, and I had a front row seat. I remember coming home after a grueling 3-day surveillance gig, bone-tired and running on fumes. All I wanted was a shower. But as I pulled up to the house, a familiar dread washed over me. All the curtains were drawn in the middle of the afternoon. The air felt heavy, too still.
I couldn't rest, so I wandered the quiet house and ended up in the attic, a place of forgotten things. I wasn't really looking for anything, just trying to escape. I pulled an old photo album onto my lap, flipping through pictures from before the darkness set in. Family vacations, birthday parties, me in a cap and gown. Then, tucked into the very last sleeve, was a photo that didn't belong. It was newer, the colors sharper. It was my father. He was on the deck of a sleek yacht, grinning, arm wrapped tight around a woman. A beautiful, blonde woman, much younger than my mother. She was looking up at him with pure adoration. In the corner of the photo, an embossed logo read, "Miller Construction Annual Retreat." I had never heard of a company retreat, especially one on a yacht. I just stared at the picture. It wasn't just the cheating. I'd suspected that for years. It was the hypocrisy. This was the man who was under so much stress that he had to beat his wife. While my mother was at home nursing bruises and making excuses for him, he was living a whole other life of sunshine and luxury. A life, I now realized, paid for by the company she helped him build. Legally, the photo was just circumstantial. But for me, it was everything. It was the key. It wasn't just proof of an affair, it was motive. It was the reason for his supposed stress. He wasn't just an abuser. He was a con artist, and my mother was his primary mark. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The helplessness was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just a family problem anymore. This was a crime scene. I carefully slipped the photograph out and took a high-resolution picture of it on my phone. Then I went back downstairs, my mind already working. The daughter had grieved long enough. Now, the detective was taking over.
I woke up with a singular purpose. The fog was gone. I knew I couldn't just arrest him for assault. My mother was too terrified to testify, and without her, it was his word against nothing. He'd walk, and she would pay the price. No, a direct assault was too risky. I had to dismantle his life from the inside out. I had to go after the source of his power, his money, and his reputation. His whole life was a fortress of charm and influence. I decided to treat it like a siege. I couldn't kick down the front gate, so I would find the cracks in the foundation. The plan was two-pronged. Prong one, domestic abuse. This would be slow, patient. I convinced my mother to let me photograph her injuries. Just for us, I said. I pushed her to see her own doctor for her accidents, creating a medical paper trail. Every bruise, every fall became a data point. Prong two, financial crimes. This was where I'd hit him hard and fast. That yacht was a loose thread, and I was going to pull until his whole world unraveled. It's a dirty secret of the job. Abusers who lead double lives often fund them with dirty money. Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. It's usually part of the same pathology of entitlement. He thought the rules didn't apply to him. I was about to prove him wrong. I started with the woman in the photo. It took less than an hour using departmental access for public record searches to get a name. Candace Shaw, a successful real estate agent. Digging deeper, I found the first crack. Candace's agency had brokered the sale of several large plots of land to a series of shell corporations. The contractor hired to develop those plots? Miller Construction. It was a closed loop of money and favors, but was it illegal? My badge was a key. It wasn't a skeleton key. I couldn't just start subpoenaing bank records for my father and his mistress on a hunch. That was an abuse of power that would not only get me fired, but would detonate any future criminal case. I knew the rules. This had to be ironclad, built from the outside in, using only what any citizen could legally access, until I had enough probable cause to hand it off. I had to take him down by the book.
The next few weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was Detective Miller, working my cases. By night, my small apartment became a war room, the walls covered in a spiderweb of printouts and yarn. It looked like a movie cliché, but the work was tedious, fueled by stale coffee and righteous anger. I started with Miller Construction's public records. On the surface, everything looked clean, but his ego gave me the next thread. The company website had a projects page. I cross-referenced those projects with city permit records and found the pattern. For his biggest projects, my father used the same set of subcontractors for materials. These subcontractors were all LLCs with generic names, all registered to the same P.O. box. The registered agents were lawyers who specialized in creating anonymous companies. But I had a hunch. I checked the dates these LLCs were formed against Candace Shaw's real estate deals. The pattern was undeniable. A few weeks before my father's company broke ground on a project Candace had brokered, a new materials supplier LLC would pop into existence. The scheme was clear. He was awarding contracts to shell companies he secretly controlled.
He'd bill his clients inflated prices from these fake suppliers, then buy the real materials for much less. The difference, hundreds of thousands of dollars per project, was funneled into the shell companies. This was the money that paid for the yacht, for Candace, for the entire lie. But I still needed to prove it. I had timelines and corporate records, but not the bank statements showing the flow of money. My next move was to look at the land deals themselves. Candace was suspiciously good at getting residential land rezoned for commercial use, massively increasing its value. How? I started reading the minutes from the city zoning board meetings. The votes were often close, but they always swung her way. One board member, Arthur Finch, voted for her proposals every single time. A public records search on Finch showed he drove a luxury car far beyond a public servant's salary. A vehicle registration search showed the car wasn't his. It was registered to a corporation, Sunrise Properties LLC, one of my father's shell companies. That was it. Bribery. He wasn't just a fraud, he was corrupting public officials. His house of cards was built on a foundation of crime, and I had just found the brick that would bring it all down. This was more than a personal suspicion now. It was a clear-cut case. It was time to take this out of my apartment and into an office where it belonged.
Going official was the most dangerous step. I couldn't walk into my own precinct. My father was too connected. Word would get back to him in a heartbeat. I needed an outside agency, someplace with jurisdiction, but no ties to the Miller name, the district attorney's office. I called in a favor with a former colleague, David, who'd moved to the DA's white-collar unit. I met him for coffee, far from our offices. I laid out the file, my hands shaking slightly. I kept it clinical. Not my father, but Richard Miller. Not his mistress, but Candace Shaw. I told him I'd gotten a tip and pieced it together from public records. David listened, his eyes scanning the documents. I saw the moment his professional interest kicked in. He saw what I saw, a prosecutable case. "This is extensive," he said, looking up. "Where'd you get all this?" "Public records," I said, my voice flat. Got a tip about the zoning board guy and started pulling threads. He gave me a long look. He knew there was more to it, but he also knew a solid case when he saw one. "I'll take it to the chief investigator," he said, sliding the file into his briefcase. "No promises, but you need to stay out of it from here on out. Your involvement could kill the whole thing." "I understand," I said, the hardest lie I've ever told. I had delivered the bomb. Now, I had to trust them to light the fuse. With the financial case in motion, I turned back to my mother. The clock was ticking. When the investigation started, my father's world would implode, and his rage would be unpredictable. I had to get her out. I went to her house that afternoon. "Mom," I began gently, "I need you to just listen. No excuses, just listen." I told her I knew about the affair. I didn't show her the photo. That would have been too cruel. But I described the double life, the money, the lies. I watched as the years of denial began to painfully fall away from her face. "He always said the business was struggling," she whispered. "He said we had to cut back. He canceled my credit cards last year." Financial abuse. It was another layer of his control. The sheer cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Mom, things are going to happen soon," I said carefully. "There's an investigation. When it happens, he's going to be angry. You can't be here." For the first time, I saw a flicker of anger in her eyes, a buried ember finally getting oxygen. "What do you need me to do?" That night, we moved my mother out of the house she had lived in for 30 years. As we were leaving, she stopped and looked back at the home that had been her palace and her prison.
Then she straightened her shoulders, walked out, and didn't look back. I took her to a small, furnished apartment I had rented under a different name. For the first time in decades, my mother was safe. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally doing my real job.
2 weeks later, David called. "It's a go," he said. "Warrants are signed. We're hitting his office and Finch's house at 0600 tomorrow." I didn't sleep. I just sat in my apartment, watching the clock, my heart pounding with terror and vindication. The next morning, I was parked in an unmarked car a block from the Miller Construction office. I knew I should have stayed away, but I couldn't. At 6 a.m. sharp, a convoy of dark cars from the DA's office pulled into the lot. Investigators swarmed out, silent and professional. They poured into the building that bore my family name, a monument built on lies and my mother's pain. For hours, I watched them carry out boxes of files, computers, hard drives. The methodical dismantling of his empire was more satisfying than any screaming match could ever be. Later that day, he called. His voice was a raw scream of fury. "What did you do? This was you. They took everything. They're ruining me. After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me?" I listened to his rant, and for the first time, I felt nothing. No fear, no guilt, just the rage of a cornered animal. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Maybe your business isn't as clean as you pretend. You should get a lawyer." Then I hung up and blocked his number. The spell was broken. His power over me was gone. The raid sent shockwaves through the community. His accounts were frozen. Finch was arrested. The story was the lead on every local news channel. His facade of respectability was shattered.
Seeing my father's face on the news, not as a community leader, but as a criminal suspect, changed everything for my mother. The fear that had held her hostage was replaced by the realization that he wasn't invincible. "They believed you," she said when I visited her that night. "I just gave them the facts, Mom," I said. "The facts were always there." That night, she told me everything. The years of pain and humiliation came pouring out. The threats, the isolation, the gaslighting. She told me about him throwing a plate of food at her head, about him taking her car keys so she couldn't leave. As she spoke, with her permission, I recorded her. Her story became a formal witness statement. With every word, I saw her grow stronger. The next day, we walked into the DA's office. My mother, head held high, told her story to the lead prosecutor. Her testimony changed everything. It was no longer just a white-collar case. The DA's office now had a credible victim for domestic assault, intimidation, and unlawful imprisonment. My father wasn't just facing prison for fraud. He was facing charges for what he did to my mother behind closed doors. My mother had found her voice, and it was going to be the sound of his undoing.
The legal machine was relentless. Stripped of his money and reputation, my father was a shadow of his former self. His lawyers went on the attack, filing motions to suppress evidence, painting me as a vindictive cop who abused her power. But the DA's case was airtight. Every piece of financial evidence was obtained with a legal warrant, and my mother's testimony was the unshakable core. In a pre-trial hearing, she looked my father in the eye and recounted his abuse with a calm, steady voice. She was no longer his victim. She was his accuser. Faced with a mountain of evidence, my father took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to grand larceny, felony fraud, and aggravated assault. Candace Shaw turned state's evidence for a lighter sentence. The walls had completely closed in. I was in the courtroom for his sentencing. He stood before the judge, a broken man in an ill-fitting suit, refusing to look at me or my mother.
The judge's words were scathing, describing him as a man who used his power not to build, but to destroy. He was sentenced to 7 to 10 years in state prison. As the bailiffs led him away, his eyes finally met mine. I saw a flash of bewilderment, as if he still couldn't understand how it all went so wrong. Then it was replaced by a cold glare that blamed everyone but himself. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet, profound relief. The war was over.
The months that followed were for rebuilding. My mother received what was rightfully hers from the liquidated assets. The beautiful house was sold. The life my father built was erased. My mother stayed in the small, safe apartment. For the first time, she was in control. The fear in her eyes was replaced by peace. She started taking horticulture classes at the local community college. Her greatest joy was a small community garden plot. I'd visit on weekends and find her there, hands in the soil, a real smile on her face. She planted tomatoes, lavender, and a row of defiant sunflowers that grew tall, facing the sun. It was a place where she could nurture life and watch something beautiful grow from the scorched earth of her past. She never spoke of him. She was focused only on the future, on the simple pleasure of a life without fear.
Looking back, it all started with that one photograph, a 4x6 piece of paper that held the truth of a 30-year lie. It was the catalyst that allowed me to align my duty as a daughter with my duty as a detective. Taking him down wasn't easy. It forced me to use the tools of my trade against my own family. But it also taught me what justice really is. It isn't always a dramatic courtroom confession. Sometimes it's the quiet, methodical work of following a paper trail. It's about empowering a victim to find her voice. It's about dismantling a system of abuse, one legal document at a time. My father is in prison. My mother is free. She spends her days in her garden, a testament to resilience. As for me, I still wear the badge, but it feels different now. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important cases are personal, and that true justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. It's about protecting the innocent, especially when they're living under your own roof. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next story we share. Thank you for watching.